Take a moment to look at the faces on your social media feed. Every blemish is filtered out, every shadow is accounted for, and every glow is curated. We see the final, flawless image and rarely stop to consider the chemical or digital layers required to build it. In 1940s Madras, the engineering behind that flawless image was significantly more physical. This was the era of Gemini Studios, one of the most influential film organizations in the early days of Indian filmmaking. Because cameras were heavy and technology was limited, outdoor shooting was a luxury. 95% of a movie was produced right here, under massive studio lights inside a strictly controlled environment. To understand the reality of this industry, we have to look past the actors in the spotlight. We find the real story in the ingredients of a specific cosmetic brand, the oppressive atmosphere of a repurposed room, and the daily labor of the backstage crew. Early cinematic history was forged on this factory floor. It was a place of grueling heat and intense irony, where the polished fantasy seen by the public was manufactured by workers who were often invisible to the world. In 1940, Gemini Studios began ordering truckloads of a cosmetic material known as Pancake. This brand held a prestigious global reputation. It was the preferred makeup of international screen legends like the Swedish actress Greta Garbo, helping define the visual aesthetic of the silent film era. Indian stars like Miss Gohar and Vayanthi Mala used Pancake in massive quantities during their peak years, though the brand eventually disappeared from the market as technology changed. The makeup department at Gemini was located on the upper floor of a building that previously served as the stables for Robert Clive's horses. The room featured half a dozen large mirrors, surrounded by incandescent lights at every angle. These bulbs burned with a searing white heat, and the mirrors reflected that energy back onto anyone sitting in the chair. Workers and actors described the sensation of being baked alive in what they called a fiery misery. The studio lights were so harsh that makeup artists had to apply thick, heavy layers of Pancake to make the actors look normal on film. In the room, under natural light, these actors looked like hideous, crimson-hued monsters, their skin entirely obscured by a mask of paint. This environment created a physical ordeal for the performers. They had to sit through hours of perspiration and blinding light, enduring a sweltering, airless chamber just to appear presentable for a few minutes of screen time. The department operated under a strict hierarchy. The chief makeup man handled the lead actors, the senior assistant took the second leads, and the junior assistant was responsible for the main comedian. This was a time when the newly independent India was struggling with deep regional and linguistic divides. National unity was a major political goal, yet it was often difficult to maintain. Gemini Studios, however, was already a diverse microcosm. The makeup department was led by a Bengali, then a Maharashtrian, with staff including Dharwar Kannadigas, Madras Indian Christians, Anglo-Burmese, and local Tamils. Ashokamitran noted that this room achieved national integration through simple daily cooperation. They were a unified team years before the government began using national radio and television to broadcast the same ideal to the rest of the country. The lowest rung of this hierarchy belonged to the office boy, a man who had recently entered his early 40s. He had been with the studios for decades, and while the name stuck, he had long since outgrown the title. His workload peaked during crowd shooting days. When hundreds of background extras were needed for a scene, it was his job to ensure they were ready for the camera. He treated makeup like a construction job. He would mix thick paint in a giant vessel and slap it onto the faces of the crowd players using a large brush, aiming to close every pore on their skin as quickly as possible. This crude labor was a far cry from his original ambitions. He had joined Gemini Studios with the hope of becoming a literary star, a poet, a screenwriter, or a famous director. Instead, he found himself stuck in a menial role. His disappointment eventually turned to bitterness, leading him to dismiss his colleagues as talentless barbers and blame the studio system for crushing his genius. The office boy represents the thousands of people who gravitate towards the film industry with high hopes, only to be absorbed by the hierarchy as ordinary laborers, their artistic dreams forgotten by everyone but themselves. Amidst this collection of dreamers and workers sat Ashokamitran. he spent his days in a small cubicle fitted with large French windows. His task was deceptively simple. He cut out newspaper clippings on a vast range of subjects and organized them into handwritten files. This was the studio's primary research engine. When a writer needed an idea or a specific historical reference for a script, they relied on Ashokamitran's organized collection for inspiration. Because he sat at a desk and worked with paper, many of his colleagues, and even his boss, perceived his work as insignificant. To them, he appeared to be doing next to nothing. This misconception made his cubicle a magnet for anyone who wanted to talk. People would barge in to gossip or deliver long-winded complaints, particularly the office boy, who frequently sought out Ashokamitran to vent his frustrations. This positioning made Ashokamitran the most well-informed member of the Gemini family. By remaining a passive observer of everyone else's grievances, he gathered the raw material for his own writing. The cosmetic brand Pancake and the dreams of stardom at Gemini Studios have long since faded. However, through the eyes of a quiet worker in the background, the actual human story of Indian cinema was carefully documented and preserved.